All right, let's jump straight into this explainer. I want you to imagine something for a second. Picture a person who lives their entire life inside a psychological courtroom. Literally every single time they set a boundary, make a choice, or take a new path, it's like they're stepping right up to the witness stand. They constantly apologize, they submit their little pieces of evidence, and they meticulously justify their every move to the rest of the world. Now, they think they're building respect, right? But in reality, they're slowly bleeding their own power completely dry. So today, we're unpacking a really fascinating psychological framework from our source material. It breaks down exactly why the most influential figures in history absolutely refuse to justify their existence. So why does explaining yourself instantly destroy your authority? Well, we have to look at a pretty massive counterintuitive paradigm shift here. See, we're always taught that over-explaining is just polite. But our source material highlights that offering an explanation is rarely an act of strength. Actually, the exact second you open your mouth to defend your actions to someone who hasn't even earned the right to question them, you've already lost. Unprompted explaining is at its core a silent confession of insecurity. It broadcasts this desperate underlying message to the world that your self-worth depends entirely on their validation.
That leads us right into Dimension 1, the validation trap.
Think about it like this. Every single explanation you provide is basically a psychological transaction where you're the one footing the bill. Picture a master surgeon or, a chess grandmaster. They never stop mid-move to explain their strategy to the spectators in the room. A decision is a pure execution of reality. An explanation, on the other hand, is just a polite request for permission, and the harsh truth of human psychology is that people never truly respect what they can easily control. So offering those unprompted explanations, you're essentially just begging for their approval. Let's just sit with this concept for a second. Over 5 centuries ago, Niccolo Machiavelli analyzed this exact vulnerability. He watched powerful rulers who had these massive, unstoppable armies completely fall apart in simple diplomatic conversations. They literally destroyed their own authority, not with swords, but with just a sheer excess of defensive, unnecessary words.
Moving on to Dimension 2, the power of strategic opacity.
The absolute crucial takeaway here is that true authority never justifies its presence. Think about the most secure, confident person you know. When they make a choice, they don't launch into some lengthy monologue about it, do they? No, they act calmly, they speak deliberately, and they never ever stop to scan the room searching for little nods of approval. Strategic opacity is all about holding your ground and realizing that you absolutely do not need to give away your inner world for free. Now, the moment you actually stop explaining yourself, people are going to try to label you. They'll say things like you're cold, arrogant, or secretive, but let's translate those labels using dark psychology for a second. If we apply a reversal frame, these aren't insults at all. They're involuntary admissions of your psychological dominance over them. Cold means they can no longer trigger you. Arrogant means you're not trying to extract their approval anymore. And secretive simply means your independence terrifies them because they can't read your mind.
Which brings us to Dimension 3, defeating manipulators with silence.
Listen, when you explain your logic to someone who harbors hidden resentments, you are literally handing them a blueprint of your mind. Manipulators rarely attack you right out of the gate. Instead, they just quietly sit back and build a file on your vulnerabilities, your core values, and your anxieties, purely based on the information you voluntarily offer up. If you explain that you really hate conflict, guess what? They're going to manufacture conflict just to break your boundaries. So how do we actually counter this? Well, the source text offers a completely brilliant tactic. Next time someone aggressively challenges your choice, actually scratch the defense. Do not defend yourself. Instead, reverse the pressure with this very calm, simple question. What makes you ask that? Just ask it, hold eye contact, and watch them squirm. It becomes incredibly uncomfortable as they're suddenly forced to justify their own intrusion. And what follows that question should be just a deep, unbroken silence. A lack of response isn't some sort of passive retreat, it's a highly aggressive social boundary. By offering absolutely nothing, you're forcing the antagonist to reveal their true underlying motives, all while you risk absolutely nothing of your own. This subconscious mind simply cannot handle an unresolved loop. In fact, psychologists note that we are basically hardwired to fill conversational silence with anxiety-driven chatter. When you use this dominance through absence, without saying a single word, the antagonist begins constructing this massive psychological prison inside their own head. They start spiraling. They project their own deep insecurities right onto your absolute stillness. You essentially become a mirror that forces them to confront their own instability.
Let's dive into Dimension 4, Scarcity and the Social Jury. We need to take a really hard look at the hierarchy of your social circles and strip away all those unearned jury seats. According to this framework, there are only two very specific categories of people who actually deserve your transparent communication. In business, it's the folks whose capital is literally tied to your performance. And in life, it's the very rare few who have proven their absolute long-term loyalty to you.
0. That is exactly how many explanations you owe to casual acquaintances, toxic family members, insecure coworkers, or some anonymous critics online. You have got to stop treating these individuals as if they sit on the Supreme Court of your life. Their verdict carries absolutely zero weight. Just consider the law of emotional scarcity. Look at the stark difference between being an oversupplied resource and being a high-value asset. The very moment you shut the book and stop constantly explaining yourself, your value absolutely skyrockets. And why is that? Because human beings naturally devalue what is constantly accessible to them. When you become selective and emotionally independent, people instinctively realize that your attention is something to be earned, and they naturally adjust their posture to respect you more.
And finally, Dimension 5, Total Internal Sovereignty. You know, most people spend their entire lives just waiting around for society or critics to validate their choices. But the real secret to unshakable power? It's realizing that the jury doesn't even exist. You have to stop treating your life as some court case to be argued in front of entirely unqualified people. You aren't a defendant on trial. You are an independent force. And forces do not explain, they simply execute.
I want to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought. Tomorrow, for sure, someone is going to deliberately misinterpret your silence. Or they'll challenge a personal choice, secretly hoping you'll step right back into that comfortable trap of self-defense. So when that moment comes, are you going to bleed your power dry again? Or will you let your silence breathe? In an oversharing world that is just obsessed with validation, your consistency and your silence are your absolute greatest competitive advantages. Let them speculate, let them wonder, and choose to remain completely untouchable.